Before I start, I want to, some people find what I have to say very upsetting, because what I'm saying is very upsetting. So I just want to say before I start that I think Ireland has a fantastic future. I think it's a fantastic country and it has a fantastic future. We need radical change, and we could be the most dynamic country in the Western world. I just want to say that before I start, because what I'm going to show you, you'll find actually very, very upsetting. But, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself before I start. I lived 20 years overseas, and I worked in various parts of the world. And at one point I lived in Tanzania when their currency collapsed and the IMF came in. And what drove me to study the international monetary system was the experience I had in that country, where when the IMF came in, children were dying all around me. And I wanted to understand how that could happen. And I came back, having worked all over the world, I view Ireland as part of a big jigsaw. And I look for the solutions within that huge jigsaw. I don't look for the solutions in Ireland, because we're in a global economy. And if you start looking for the solutions to the problems, it's very difficult. You're not going to find them. You have to look at what's going on around you in the world and then pick your solutions from that. So I came back to Ireland in the 80s. I couldn't get a job, and I set up my own business, and I got involved in politics. And I discovered that they weren't giving any answers to the problems that the answers they were giving just didn't make any sense. So I decided I would go to study economics in the hope that I would learn from that what had happened to these children in Africa and why they died and how the system works. So anyway, I got into Trinity as a mature student, and at the end of the first year I was learning absolutely nothing that was relevant to what I wanted to hear. And I heard there was a busload of graduate economists going up to Stormont, and I decided I'd go on the bus with them, because I'd be able to, at that time there was an international debt crisis, and when I started my business I was paying 21% interest. I decided I'd go on the bus because I had them cornered, captured audience, and I could go from seat to seat to discuss the international debt crisis. And not one of them knew what I was talking about. And they were going out, these are the people who are running Ireland now. So I went into the professor the next morning and I explained what had happened. And I had small children at the time, and it was costing me a fortune. So I didn't want to be wasting my time. The professor just laughed and he said, you can stay here 5 years, 6 years, but you'll have no idea, you'll come out an economist, but you'll have no idea how the world is held together. So I left, ran my business, brought up my children, but for the last few years I've been studying this. At first, I just want to address the referendum that's coming up, just very briefly for a second, okay? Because I heard Michael Noonan on the radio on Sunday, and he actually lied. He actually lied on national radio. And I just want to show what he said and the truth, okay? Where am I? Here we are. This is a chart from the year 2000 to 2010, and the yellow boxes are the areas where you see all the different countries. The yellow boxes are when they didn't operate within the budget limits. If you look at Germany, Germany was outside the region for 7 years. If you look at France, France didn't stay within the budget requirements for 6 years. Michael Noonan said on the radio on Sunday that if we had stayed within our budget requirements, we wouldn't be in the position we were in today. Well, it's a lie. It's just a barefaced lie, and it's not factual. There we are from the year 2000. Look, we were never in a yellow box all the way until the collapse on Wall Street in 2008. And then look where we went when they forced us to do the banks, right? Now, the first thing I want to say is, when they forced us to do the banks, they broke international law. When they put the debts of the banks onto our back, they broke international law under odious debt, which means that no government can take on a debt and put it onto the backs of the people that's not for the benefit of the people. It's illegal. It's also illegal under the Lisbon Treaty, Article 122 to 125. No bailout. And when people say, oh, but we needed the bailout. But we didn't get the bailouts. The banks got the bailout, right? If you look at these figures here, the IMF produced these figures themselves. And I got this the day they actually went into the Department of Finance. And they were our borrowing, Japan, USA, Greece, everybody else. They were the borrowing requirements for 2010. Look at Ireland. We were about the same as Canada. We were slightly worse than Germany. We were better than France, right? But when they put the banks onto our back, we went from there to there. So nearly half of everything that we owe was as a result of the banks, and it's actually illegal. Now, I just want to show you some figures here. From that date, at the end of 2000, from December 2009 to June 2011, you're looking at 1.5 years, right? Our debt has gone up 2.5 times. It has doubled and half time again. Spain doubled, Italy doubled, almost all those 5 countries that they like to call the pigs, right? Ireland, Spain, Italy, Greece, all of them have doubled. We have doubled 1.5. Now Spain is only starting to go into the problem. They're not really in the thick of it. So I'd say by the time they're finished in 6 months' time, their debt will have maybe 4 times, gone up 4 times, right? Now, when the governments say that you need to vote yes because there's a 700 billion in the kitty and we may need to put our hand into that if we need a second bailout. Well, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, we will need a second bailout. It's impossible that we would not. However, what they're not telling you is, of that 700 billion, we have to pay 1.6%, which is our contribution to the petty cash, because this is just petty cash. It's just starting out. So our contribution to that is 11.2 billion, plus interest because we don't have the money. Now it is spread out over a few years, or they're telling us it is, I doubt it. But if you look at the other countries that are in serious trouble, it actually comes to 6.86 trillion, right? Now I'm not suggesting that all of these countries are going to need bailing out, and I'm going to explain to you how they actually bankrupt you, right? If you look at Greece, Greece owed the least amount of money of anyone in the whole, probably in the whole world, including the United States and Japan, right? Now, did you ask yourself the question, why did Greece, who owed so little money, how did they go bankrupt, right? And Noonan is an absolute disgrace, the way he's treated Greece. An absolute disgrace, because we could be next in line, and if they decide to take us out, there's actually nothing you can do about it. So I'm going to explain to you how they actually bankrupt you and how they do it, okay? Now, they put huge words on like credit default swaps, derivatives, over-the-counter derivatives. But when you strip it all down, strip away all the big words that they use that mean nothing, all it is if you take, I'm going to use Greece, okay? You have 4 banks. These guys are the 4 banks. You have JP Morgan, you have Goldman Sachs, you have Citibank, and you have Bank of America. And this is actually how they bankrupt you. This is how they're going to take down Spain, and they will come after us and make I have no doubt about it whatsoever, right? But this is how they do it. These 4 guys control the insurance market on bonds, on debt, government bonds, right? Credit default swap means default, it's insurance on default. These 4 banks control it. I'm not going to look up my notes now, but it's in the region of, it's pretend insurance. They have actually set aside €1 for every 50 euros of insurance they sell. So there's big money in it for them. Big profits, big money, because they've literally nothing set aside. Okay? So you have 70 trillion in insurance, 50 trillion, 45 trillion, and somewhere in the region of 35. I won't waste my time going up, looking at my notes, but in that region. Okay. So these guys get together and they say, okay, let's start putting up the insurance rates on Greece. Because the United States owes more money than the whole of Europe put together, right? So why little Greece? You know, why didn't they just go to Spain? Why didn't they go somewhere else first? Greece was the trial run, okay? So these four guys start pushing up the insurance on the debt. It's 5%, 10%, 20%. Then the other side of the world, you could have sovereign funds from the Middle East, from China, Russian private money. And they're all looking, because we're in a global economy, they're looking at the screens all over the world and they're going, oh my goodness gracious me, look what's happening. The insurance on credit default swaps, the insurance on the debt of Greece is going through the roof. We had better start asking for more interest on the money we're lending to this country. So suddenly, the interest rates start driving up, right? But they put the insurance up because they know that's what's going to happen, right? At one point during the crisis, before Greece went bust, the insurance, the interest they were paying was 150%. Right now, on a 2-year bond for Greece, it's 229%, right? Now, China, every country in the world has credit default swaps, or insurance on their debt. China has repudiated it, the insurance on their debt, where it relates to them calling it fraudulent. Okay? As long as this system, they can come to Ireland in the morning and they can start pushing up our rates on the insurance. And then on this side, you have they'll start asking more and more money for, and we're bankrupt. It's as simple as that. Within 24 hours, 36 hours, you're gone. But what happened with Greece is really, really interesting. When they went into Brian Lenihan in the middle of the night, they took a dying man into an office in the middle of the night with nobody in the office except the Attorney General and the representative for the ECB. Now, the representative for the ECB is Patrick Houlihan. He doesn't work for us. He works for the ECB. And make no mistake about that, right? So Fianna Fáil's excuse is they took a dying man into the office and they put a gun to his head. I don't know what excuse Fine Gael had. But anyway, they told us that we will have no write-off on any of the bank debt. None. It would all go on to the Irish citizens' backs. And yet Merkel and the same people went to Greece and they said the bondholders had to take a hit on Greece. Now, I need you to listen to this very carefully because this is really important and it relates to this and what the government are telling you. Greece bondholders took a 70+% hit or a write-down on their bonds. Okay? These four bankers who take out the credit insurance also run the office that controls declaring when a default is a default. In other words, they control when a payout on a debt collapse happens. Okay? So they sell the insurance, but they also control when the payout occurs. Do you understand? Right? So what they did with Greece is they had a 70-odd% write-down, and the ECB came in. The ECB had some bonds belong to Greece, and the ECB said, we're taking no write-down. None. The private people who have private bonds and belong to Greece can take a write-down. We're taking none. So what happened now, what's happening now and what's going on now is, because there was no insurance payout on Greek debt to anyone who had bought their bonds, there now is no market for anyone's debt anywhere in Europe. So I heard Michael Noonan at 5 o'clock on the radio today saying, if we vote no, we're going to pay more for borrowing money. The truth of the matter is that no private person is buying any bonds from any country anywhere in Europe, not just Ireland, but nowhere else. And they're not telling you the truth. The only one buying bonds are the banks. Now, hang on for a minute. Where are the banks getting the money? The ECB is giving the money to the banks at 1% or less. The banks are buying the government bonds but government debt, they're charging them, in Ireland's case, 8.2%. Right? They're pocketing the 7% profit, and they're coming back to us for the capital and the interest. Okay? Now swallow that one. Try not choking on that one. Alright? And then Noonan gets up and he says, and Kenny goes over and says, it's our fault we overspent. It was private debt with private bankers. It wasn't our debt. It's illegal. And the case that Ben and John have in the court is on odious debt. But do you know what they did? And I'll try not to curse. The Anglo debt was called a promissory note. A promise to pay. Right? A promise. Not a contract. A promise. Do you know what they did within 3 days of John and Ben putting the case into the court? They switched it from a promise to a sovereign. Do you get it? Yes. You do.
So it's our fault.
It's our fault and it's now legally our debt. And if we vote yes to this referendum, we are legally enshrining what those did to us. They're lying, and they're lying through their teeth. Now what you've got is, the Italians have a definition for it. When you get a merging of corporation, in this case banking corporation and government, one relies on the other at the expense of the people, and the Italians call it fascism. So what you actually have is fascism. You have 420 odd million people in Europe living under a political and economic system that no one voted for. You have 80% of our laws coming from a body that no one voted for. You're actually worse than Russia was before the bloody revolution. I've only one thing to say to you. Turn off your goddamn televisions. Now, if I haven't upset you enough, can I upset you a bit more? You'll take another of this, will you?
He looked all cuddly.
Because I'm really... do you know what? Sometimes I swear to God, I'm sorry I ever started this. Because it's so upsetting. It's actually so upsetting. By the time we're finished with them, they'll all know it. Now, I'll tell you something you don't know. Nobody knows in Ireland because nobody will give the information out, and the RTE and everybody else knows it, and nobody will say anything. Yeah, I put my name. The reason you're having a referendum is partly my fault, because I put my name to a court challenge to stop them from signing it without our saying it. And they had 14 days in the courts to come back to us to answer questions. And on the 14th day, they announced a referendum. So the government were actually forced into having a referendum. But I was actually involved in Occupy Dame Street. Right? I won't tell you. I was actually involved in Occupy Dame Street, and I used to do this on the side of the street for about 5 months, right? In the wind and the cold. And on the 14th day that they had to answer the question, they sent the police in and they cleared the place. On the exact day, it was political. And all the files we had and statements from bank managers, we had a statement from a senior banker out of the central bank who came down to us, all sorts of people. They took documents, they took filing cabinets of books, they threw them into the dumps. They're all gone. Everything into the dumps. If that had happened in Egypt, in Tahrir Square or however you pronounce it, there would have been an outcry. There wasn't a whimper out of anyone. Now, I want to tell you, Ireland has a great future. And I want to tell you that, right? But we're going to have to do a lot of things. We're going to have to take... The reason that Iceland is having a huge recovery is because of their mackerel. That's the reason they're having a huge recovery. We're going to have to, through the law, first, get rid of this debt. And we'll do it through the law, right? We can pay the debt that we owe as a people. but not debts that are illegal. So we have to repudiate those, not default on them because it was never our debt. We have to repudiate, and the sooner we do it, the better, because the longer we leave it, the worse the situation is going to be. Because you see, it's gone up 2.5 times already, okay? And we have to take back our natural resources. And Ray Burke went into the office, and he was the only one in the office who signed the deal on the oil and gas off Mayo. He was actually the only one in the office who actually he didn't sign the deal, he renegotiated it. He was the only one in the office. So we have no doubt whatsoever, if we challenge it in law and follow the money, and there is actually a case in Africa that we're having a look at that set a precedent in this regard of follow the money through banks internationally. I have no doubt whatsoever we will deem it to be illegal. But anyway, so I want you to have faith that we could have a fantastic country. But and I want to say that before I start this because I'm going to upset you, okay? Bloody hell, I'm not going to be the only one not sleeping, right? What you have here is, there are the years, 50 years, 45 years, 40 years, right down to zero, okay? And this is the top 500 companies quoted on the stock market. And it's a way of measuring. Anyway, they only had it going back to about 1950, and an economist from Yale put the balance, he went back to 1870. So this is the boom-bust cycles of that period, okay? Now, I want to clarify, we do not have capitalism now. People think we have capitalism, but we don't. If you look at the percentage of wealth in the hands of 1% in 1929 and look at today, it's identical. If you don't have a reasonable distribution of wealth, capitalism can't function. And that's why it's collapsing now, okay? We don't have capitalism. And it's not the fault of capitalism that we're in the position we're in today. It's greed. Now, if you look at the boom of the 20s, collapse of the 1929, then it dropped down, and then when it got down to about here, it's called a dead cat bounce in the industry, where the market starts to collapse and people think they'll get good value and they jump back in. So you get this bounce. But if you measure off where the bounce was, you can tell what the final collapse will be. So in 1929, it was minus 48 at that point. The final collapse was 90. So here you have the boom of the 60s and 70s, the collapse of the 80s. And it was about here I went into business at interest rates of 21%. But when you had the bounce there, it was minus 38, the final collapse was minus 78. Okay. Now, you have the boom of the 2000s. You see how much bigger it is than 1929? The red area is extreme bubble, okay? And the years are the number of years you would wait to get a return if you invested. So when you were up here, you were looking at 45 years to get a return on your money. What's regarded as a reasonable return is about 15 years. Okay, so anything above that is kind of in the bubble territory of one extreme or the other. But right now, we are at minus 59%. So if you measure off minus 59, the total collapse will be in the region of minus 100 to 120. But we're actually at 23 years, 23 and a half years. We're just about here. Now the reason, we've been here hanging on for about 2 years, and the reason we're hanging on there for about 2 years is they've pumped about 17 trillion. We're talking global here now, okay? They've pumped about 17 trillion into the banking system, but that 17 trillion has not gone into the general economy. It has only gone into the banks to feed these guys who've overexposure on the insurance. Do you understand? This is not a debt problem. This is an insurance problem and interest on it. This is an American banking problem. Right? That's what it's about. If they stop printing, we will collapse almost immediately. If they continue printing, we're going to have serious, very, very serious hyperinflation. And as you can see by the petrol pumps and everything else, okay, it's already starting to kick in. Now, I'm going to show you how It's pretty bad, but anyway, it's not, the colour isn't great. This is the increase in the price of oil from 1950 to 2010. It was pretty flat until the mid-70s. And what happened there was, up to 1970, because oil is paid for internationally in US dollars, up to 1971, the dollar was backed by gold, which meant that they couldn't keep printing the dollar without setting aside a certain amount of gold. So that controlled the amount of money they printed. Because these prices go up. The more money you print, the higher the prices go. It's a little bit like if you paid $1 million for a Ferrari and you put it out on the road, and everyone would go, wow, look at that Ferrari, it's gorgeous and it's worth $1 million. But suddenly they started to put loads of Ferraris out on the road. Nobody would go, oh, look at your Ferrari. It's the same thing with money. The more money you print, the less purchasing power it has. Okay? Now, so 1971, the United States came off the gold standard because they were fighting in Vietnam and they needed the extra money to run the war, and they didn't have the money to buy the gold to set aside, right? And it was an international agreement that oil would be traded, and most commodities were traded internationally with dollars. So after 71 was when the big printing of dollars came in, and that's why you had this huge increase. But if you look at the red line on the bottom, that's actually gold. So the purchasing power of gold in 1950 was exactly the same as it was in 2010. You could buy the same amount of petrol there for the same amount of gold as you could here. But you needed all those extra money in dollars, euros, or whatever, right? But now watch what has happened for the last 2 years. Okay? You see, I'll just go back here for a second. You see where the euro is? This is the euro. It's actually not too bad up to about the beginning of 2010, right? Because Merkel was saying, I'm not printing, I'm not printing, I'm not printing. But as long as she kept saying, we're not printing, our prices could stay stable, right? But they all want her to print. So printing we got. And also she has to print, and Europe has to print, because if you don't, our currency is going to stay so strong, we won't be able to sell, our prices will be too high. So what we're in now, as Ben said, is the Third World War, but it's being conducted in Wall Street, literally. And because they're all devaluing together, you can't measure what's happening. You can go into the bank and you see the exchange rates don't change very much. They're all, and you can't measure it because they're all doing it together. The only way you can measure it is if you measure the price of a barrel of oil or a bushel of wheat or gold, and then you can see what's happening. But you can't see it by comparing one currency with the other because they're all at it, right? But in 2010, they started printing euros, and that's why your petrol is costing more, because it's the purchasing power of it is dropping, right? But again, gold is kind of wiggly all over the place, but it's still holding its purchasing power. This is, and the reason I'm focusing on the United States is because they're still using the United States dollar for oil, for wheat, for the things that matter, right? But that's, I think, is going to change very fast. I think the dollar is going to collapse. But anyway, you see here, you have a reasonable, this is the printing of US dollars, okay? And the last time you saw something like this was in Weimar, Germany. What's going on now is actually very similar. This was when they started printing like mad here. The first batch, quantitative easing 1, which is just printing money. Then they had quantitative easing 2, and now they're talking about bringing in quantitative easing 3. Right? This is what you see in Zimbabwe, Weimar, Germany. That's what we're in the middle of. Okay? The reason I'm showing you this is, if you know what's happening, you can protect your family and you can protect yourselves. Right? And start being as self-sufficient as you can, and don't be relying on other people. If you have a bit of garden, no matter how small it is, start using it. Start being self-sufficient, and just, you know, they might get together, they might sort the problem out, but one way or the other, costs are going to go so high that you need to be as self-sufficient as possible. You know, years ago, everyone, even when they had a big farm, always had a small section of the farm where you had the egg money. I remember my grandmother had her egg money. Everybody had their egg money. But we don't do it anymore, you know.
Because the new laws that come from the east.
I know.
It's coming down, you're 100%
I know.
right.
Yeah.
With the laws, when it have to be, they wouldn't want to be sold at the farm yet.
I know that. But we just have to start disobeying them, right? But everybody's at it, including China. And China, the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund in China has said last week they are not investing in European sovereign bonds. So don't expect China to start buying our debt. They will not. They'll come and they'll take our milk and they'll take anything they can get for nothing. But they're not going to give us money for, right? That is the increase in the debt of the United States in 1 year from 14 trillion to 16.5 trillion. That's the big round blue ball is US military spending. The red, the plummy one is China. It's just, I don't know whether to go over this or not. It'll take too much time and it's getting late. I think I'll just bypass it. That's the increase in the price of oil from 1970 up to today, right? I'll pass that, and I'll pass that, and I'll pass that, pass that. Okay, right.
Is it getting off tonight?
It looks there like gold is rising in price. And how many people here think gold and silver are rising in price? But they're not actually. Gold, you could put wheat there, you could put oil there, the same, and they look like they're rising in price. It's not, that's exactly it. Because they're printing so much money, the purchasing power is dropping. It's not that oil is going up in price, or wheat is going up, or bread is going up. It's not. It's the purchasing power is dropping. The price of gold is the same today as it was in the time of Jesus.
It's just the value of money.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, this is just my suggestion, right? And I'm going on the basis that we the people and direct democracy and you make a decision, right? But based on everything I've learned in studying this, I believe that what we should do is, one, repudiate the debt that's illegal. We do it through law, we do it through the international courts. Two, we bring in a parallel currency of gold and silver so that we can protect the citizens' savings and their hard-earned money. And then let anyone who wants to trade in the euro, and they're going to mass produce it to the point that we're going to be enslaved, just let them at it.
Is there somewhere in Ireland after starting up their own?
Yeah, China is the only country in the world protecting their citizens. China has gold and silver shops on every corner like we have pubs, and the government have told their citizens, get rid of your paper. They're the only country in the world that are protecting their citizens. And China are buying gold like there's no tomorrow. Central banks are buying gold like there's no tomorrow, because they know that the paper system is in serious trouble. Now, the suggestion I have is if we brought in a parallel currency, that you don't actually, because we know they're going to print and print and print, and the paper money is going to lose its value, that when we mint the coins, when we press the coins, we don't put a face value on them. We don't put €5 or €10 or anything. We just put a blank coin with maybe a heart. The coin is the weight of the coin. So as gold and silver go up, as the price goes up, the coin in your pocket will go up in value because it's not based on the face value of the coin, it'll be based on the weight. So you protect your purchasing power, you protect the money you've worked hard to save and to try and get by if you're putting money aside to pay for your children's education or for your old age or whatever. You have some way of protecting yourself. And because you would have gone in with your €100 and given that over the counter for your few silver coins, right? I've forgotten what I was going to say. That's a relief. I actually, in early...
We're not all doomed.
Yeah. Early 2010, I put a proposal together on a parallel currency because I saw what was happening. I saw that we were going to be wiped out. And at the time, I put it into the government, and I couldn't get onto the Public Accounts Committee. And I nagged them, and I couldn't get on. And the civil servant phoned me, and he said, you want to get onto the Public Accounts Committee? Oh, you know, really, what do you have to say for yourself? I explained to him, I've just been blah, blah, blah. And he says, that's pretty radical stuff, isn't it? He says, what, you know, have you any qualifications? Are you a banker? And I said, no. He says, are you an accountant? I said, no. He said, are you an economist? And I said, no. And he says, well, we can't just have anyone coming onto the Public Accounts Committee. So I said to him, well, what's your background? And he says, well, I'm a civil servant. I said, yeah, I know you're a civil servant, but how many years are you a civil servant? He says, about 30 years. But what's your background? And he said, civil servant. And I said, no, that's not what I mean. Are you a banker? No. Are you civil servant? Are you an accountant? No. Are you an economist? No. And at this point, I was so furious, I said, I rest my case, and I slammed the phone down. But I got a paper in under Unpost. And we had 21 billion in the pension fund, right? As our money in the pension fund at that point. Dramatically changed over the last few weeks. One, gold is now used for international trade, for selling of oil. It has been monetized. It means it is money. It's used now in the Middle East between China, Iran, Japan, India, Russia. They've all got together and they've said to the United States, we're not going to be bullied anymore. They've stopped using the United States dollar to trade. Now, 80% of all US dollars are outside the United States. And if people stop using it to trade, those dollars will have to go back to the United States. And if you think what happened in Weimar Germany is bad, what's going to happen to the United States is going to be 1,000,000 times worse. So they've completely overplayed their hand, and if they go into Iran, they're up against China, they're up against Russia, they're up against most of the East. They've overplayed their hand and they're collapsing. It's as simple as that. So I don't think they're quite as strong as, I know what you're saying, and I think it's very, very serious.
This could be the last. I'm very afraid of this situation now. It's prophesied that something will happen there in the Middle East. I'm very afraid of it. I never knew. You have told us a lot tonight. And I have the lawyers that come in here. And I tell you what, we should have one in every county in Ireland. Because the people don't understand.
See, the national broadcaster are telling you
I learned more than like I ever learned.
Well, I'm sorry I have to bring this to your table.
I'm only a very assistant. I have no education in the actual one.
Well, you're probably wiser as a result. Sometimes education can do you more damage than good, as in Trinity College doing economics. But anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is you need to start, looking to yourselves.
Can I say one quick thing, which is a positive thing as well, and that's in support of direct democracy as well. Another thing that's not in the media is Iceland. Iceland has forgiven most of its mortgage debt. Because people just said, right, we're in charge, forgive the mortgage debt. And they went, okay. No, that's all I want to say.
Does anyone have any questions? And then we'll wrap it up.
What's the story with the Euro bonds that Germany's so afraid of getting involved in?
Germany, you're going to hate me for this. You're going to hate me for this. But Merkel is right. She's actually right. Because if they have, you see what's happened in the last 18 months because of all the printing of money. They have their history. They've learned from their history. And that's why they'll never agree to it. Noonan can get on the radio and say, vote yes for this because we want a Eurobond and we're on the road to it. They will never agree to it. Never. Never. Never agree to it. All we need is a write-down of the debt. And the reason they won't do it is because of these four guys here. Because of the trillions that they have out. Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street is not there because they want to tiddlywinks with a few bankers. Occupy Wall Street knows what's going on. The IMF, on the night, the famous night they put the debt on our back, wanted to give us a 30 billion write-off. They wanted to give it to us. And someone put a call into Gertner, and Gertner said, under no circumstances will there be any write-down for Ireland. And the reason was that if we got a 30 billion write-down, these 4 banks would go bust. That's the reason. This is about US banking system. It's not about Europe, right? Now, it may be convenient for a lot of people because who's heard of Niall Ferguson? You have. Yeah. Niall Ferguson is a very famous economist, and he's written and an author, and he comes from Scotland, but he's now in Harvard, I think, is it? Yeah. Somewhere like that. And he said last week, and I believe this is true, European integration has always been a project for the elite that has been foisted on national electorates. The architects of the monetary union knew all along it would lead to a crisis, and the crisis would lead to a federal solution. It was designed to create a crisis. Yeah. Now, what we need to do is stand together as a people. We, the people. And we can overturn all the laws because we're sovereign. But first, we have to stop them from bullying us, and we have to stand together. And we can do it.